So the period I'm going to be doing today is going to be period 7. It goes from 1890 through 1945. I'm going to start off with the first act, and it was the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890. And basically what it did, it prohibited contracts, combinations, or monopolies of conspiracies from companies. The massacre at Wounded Knee was also in the same year as the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed. And what happened was in South Dakota, which is to now, there was this tribe, this Native American tribe called the Sioux, and they protested because of the death of one of their fellow chief members, which was the Sitting Bull. And in that war, the U.S. killed 150 Native Americans. Moving on from that time period, I'm going to go to 1895, which was when the first Supreme Court case was Pollock versus Farmers, and it was a Supreme Court case of the United States that ruled that the unapportioned income tax on the interest, dividends, and rents imposed by the Income Tax Act of 1894 were direct taxes and therefore unconstitutional. The first war from this time period would have to be the Spanish American War, which was in 1898. And it was America's desire to expand, and it was part of the reasons, but it was also because of how Spain had harsh treatment towards Cuba, and also United States wanted Cuba to gain independence from Spain. So after the whole war was done and everything, United States gained Guam and Puerto Rico and control over the Philippines, which is a huge thing back in 1898. Philippines was a major topic being talked about during that time. An interesting fact from this time period would be when in 1893 when Hawaii was annexed. Well, basically, in the last queen of Hawaii would have been Queen Lulukalani, and she was overthrown by many businessmen who imposed a provisional government. Soon after that, President Benjamin Harrison, which was president at that time, submitted a treaty to annex the Hawaii Islands to the U.S. Senate of ratification. In 1901 was a year when Theodore Roosevelt became a president. From 1901 through 1909, being elected 2 times, he was a Republican, and he was the first modern president to who wanted to expand the influences and power of executive office. Rose While Theodore Roosevelt was the President of the United States, he oversaw the realization of a long term goal for the U.S. So basically, what he started was he built the Panama Canal of 1904 through 1914. And the canal is now used as a ship canal in Panama that connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. During the construction of the Panama Canal, it was in 1906 when the FDA passed an act which was called the Pure Food and Drug Act, and basically what it did, it prevented the manufacture, sale, or transportation of adulterated, misbranded, poisonous, or deleterious food, drugs, medicines, and liquors, and for regulating traffic therein and for other purposes, so that they would double check to see if what they were serving to their customers was good or bad for their health. When the FDA demanded that this act should be passed down, many journalists took it up for themselves. For example, a journalist and novelist named Upton Sinclair wrote a novel to portray the harsh conditions that exploited the lives of immigrants in the United States and Chicago, and that were the same as cities. And basically, what the book told readers was that she was more concerned the exposure of health violations and unsanitary practices in the American meatpacking. Moving on from that, the next topic I'm going to talk about was the election of Woodrow Wilson and his beliefs that he wants to limit the campaign contributions by corporations, tariff reductions, new and stronger antitrust laws like the Sherman Antitrust, banking and currency reforms, federal income tax, the direct election of senators, and a single term presidency. And also, he wanted the independence of Philippines, which happened through the War of Spain in 1898. During Woodrow Wilson's presidency, he directed World War One, which begins in July 28th, and it was when the Austro-Hungarians declared war on Serbia. And, well, they didn't declare war, they invaded Serbia. The United States entered World War One in 1970. It joined its allies, which were Britain, France, and Russia, even though U.S. wanted to remain neutral and not get into the fight like everybody forced them and teased them to get into it. In 1918, the Treaty of Versailles was one of the peace treaties that ended the war that has been going on for 4 years. Ended with the state of war between Germany and its allied powers. Another important thing that I'd like to add to the period 7 was 1919, the Red Scare. And it was the fear of the potential rise of communism, or as people defined it at that time, radical leftism. It was used by anti leftist opponents. After the Red Scare happened, it was in 1929, which another major event happened. It was when the stock market crashed. And following that, the Great Depression lasted from 1929 to 1939. And it was basically, the market crash was basically when Dow Jones, his industrial average fell 22.6%. And from that time down, economic downturn and personal income tax, revenue, profits, and prices dropped. The unemployment in the United States rose. Some recovered in the 1930s, others recovered in the beginning of World War II, which wasn't going to be beneficial, seeing as how World War II was coming up and it needed more weapons and more food for soldiers that are going up to the battle. During the time of the stock market crashing, there was also women's suffrage. And women's suffrage was basically women who lectured, wrote, marched, lobbied, and practiced civil disobedience in order to get their own point across the system that women are just as equal as men and that nothing should differentiate them, like job hours, women be able to vote. And talking about women being able to vote, the 19th Amendment also happened in 1920, which was one of the major deals that happened. After the Great Depression was over, it was the year of the Harlem Renaissance, which was in the middle of the 30s, and basically it was the New Negro movement. And it was between World War One and 1930s. It was a creative art form for African Americans who embraced literary, musical, theatrical, and visual arts. And even though the Harlem Renaissance was a happy and joyous time for African Americans, it was also a devastating time because they would see racial prejudice, like such as blackface, and that was basically when they would mock African Americans, they would mock their Harlem Renaissance and all that stuff. They would go on stage and dance just like them, and it would just be racial prejudice towards them. There was also an important topic, which was during the Great Depression in 1933, which was the president of Germany, Paul von Hindenburg, appointed Hitler the chancellor of his German army. And he basically did that because he thought that what he was promoting and doing stuff out there of his inferior race was a good example for Germany. And he wrote this book that described all what he thought was perfect during jail when he was arrested for providing his own opinions during the war. And basically, in the World War II, which led to that, the Soviet Union, United States of America, Britain, and China, it was versus Germany, Japan, and Italy. The Allied nations, yeah, it was the Soviet Union and all those that I've named. And then the Allied Axis powers was Germany, Japan, and Italy. After World War II, when Germany lost to United States of America, during the battle, it was in 1941 when Japan attacked Hawaii on the USA side. And what it did was Japan's fighter planes attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor near Honolulu, Hawaii. It lasted for about 2 hours, and the Japanese managed to destroy about 70 American naval bases. The day after, that's when President Roosevelt declared war on Japan, seeing how Japan was the one of the Axis powers, and that was when America decided to join World War II after Pearl Harbor happened.